If you own a newer Toyota, especially a Camry, RAV4, or a late model Corolla, you might have seen a dashboard message that says, engine maintenance required, visit dealer. Here's the kicker, it's not an oil change reminder. It could be something a lot more serious. There's a known issue with the coolant bypass valve and the heater control valve on these vehicles. They can crack and leak engine coolant into the electrical connector, causing shorts, fault codes, and permanent warning lights until you replace that part and clear the code. In this video, I'll show you how to diagnose it, what parts you need, and how to fix it right the first time, with Toyota's recommended long-life coolant and a scan tool to finish off the job. Before we get started on this job, I wanted to let you know there are a couple of symptoms that we've been seeing here in the garage with some of these late model Toyotas. So the main thing that we've got going on is there's usually an illumination on the dashboard. It's going to say that you have some engine maintenance required, visit your dealer. So that's a separate message from maintenance required, visit your dealer. So a lot of times we're getting these cars coming in, the people think it just needs an oil change. Our technicians go in and we're not really paying attention much to the wording in that message, and we'll try to reset the light, change the oil. The light won't reset, and we're having a problem there because there's something else going on. Now, a little bit further investigation, we'll hook up a scan tool, we'll retrieve some trouble codes from the system, and we'll determine that we've got a code for a malfunctioning flow control valve or water control valve, heater control valve, one of these valves. They've got a few different names for them depending on your scanner as well. So this is really where the problem comes from. Now, you may also not have any instrument panel warning at all, and you may just have a coolant leak somewhere. So this is another scenario that we're seeing here in the garage, is that somebody comes in, maybe they're in for a service and they're not even really complaining about anything, but they've got some coolant stains that we see leaking out of these valves, and we know where that's headed to. So it's time to replace them. You also may leave some smell in there. So if a customer's coming in and telling us they've got this sweet smell of coolant or antifreeze, that could be another indication that maybe you've got one of these valves leaking. Let me show you what these things look like. So there's one here, and this is the flow control valve, and then we have another one here. Okay, so this one is hiding underneath the battery, and this one is located just behind the cylinder head. The first step in accessing these hoses, we need to drain the coolant and we need to remove the battery. Like I said, the second valve that we want to replace on here is underneath the battery. So we're going to take the battery out and the battery tray out. Let's take a peek at that and see what it looks like. Anytime you remove the battery, you want to disconnect the negative cable first and install the negative cable last. This is to avoid any short circuit against any ground components in the car. It's worth noting on here that we installed a memory saver on this. This way we could save the client's factory presets in there, their radio stations, clock, all those things. If you have a tool like that, it's worth putting on the car ahead of time. This way you don't have to reprogram all that later. There's a battery hold down on the side of this battery you want to take out, and we can pull the battery out. We still have some more electrical connectors and cables and things that are attached to the battery tray, so you want to go ahead and pop these out. We'll just go ahead and take some of the bolts out. It's probably the easiest way. You could disconnect each loom by depressing the plastic piece on the harness, but it's just easier sometimes just to take the bolts out, and we'll put them back on when we're done. This one here is a little bit easier to just take the harness out of the bracket. And then we've got one right here too. It's got a couple little tabs on it you can release, and then another bracket right here. Now, the next thing I want to do, I'm going to get this air filter out of the way so that you guys can see a little better what's going on under here. Make sure you use these little tabs on here to release these connectors from the air box. Once those are out, we can get this out of the way. All right, we're going to take this off here as well. Just squeeze these tabs and it should pop out. Now we've got full access to our battery tray. You'll see on the battery tray, we've got a few 12mm bolts that need to be removed. Okay. Now, hopefully we can get this all out of here. There's your battery tray. And now we have access to the second valve over here. This one is bolted to the top of the transmission. So it connects here to the cooler, and then it works its way all the way back around over here. So we'll need to unplug the electrical connectors for these, squeeze the tab and release it. This one here, same thing. Squeeze the tab and release it. Okay, I just want to show you how this new valve is situated in here on top of the transmission. So it's sitting in here like this, right, connected to that cooler. So this is what we're looking for. This other end is going to connect over to this heater pipe. This valve sits on top of the engine over here, actually on the back side of it, I should say. And it's going to be situated something like this, okay? So that's what we're looking for. See this hose runs around the back side. Let's go up in the air and drain some coolant out of this car before we go any further. In order to drain the coolant from the car, we need to access the bottom of the radiator where the radiator petcock valve is. In order to do that on this car and show it to you, I'm going to remove this whole front lower cover on here. There's a ton of bolts on it. We'll just zip them all out. With all these screws out, there's a couple of clips that need to be removed. There's one here and one here. Now we can take the last center bolt out without dropping the entire cover. We want to go ahead and hook a hose up to this fitting so we don't spill coolant in the frame. We'll put this hose on the end there, and then we can just loosen this petcock up. And we'll let the coolant drain into our pan. With the radiator completely drained, we'll go ahead and tighten up the petcock. Now with all this stuff out of here, you can reach this from up top, like I am now. The next thing we want to do is start disconnecting some of this water valve hose connector. It's got a quick coupler on it right here. And what you'll need to do is you'll need to get a little pick or screwdriver and just hook it in these little fingers on here. So right here you can see if I just twist this out, I can pull it out a little bit, put some pressure on it with your finger, and then you can do the same thing on the other one. And you'll see this whole clip will slide out. With the clip out, you should be able to lift this off, and it's disconnected. All right, with that hose out of the way, there's a couple of 12mm bolts that hold this bracket on. So there's one that goes right to this plastic pipe, and that pipe actually covers the bolt that we really need to get to. So we're just going to pull this one out of the way right here, and now we have access to the bolt we actually need to get for that water control valve. So with this hose pushed out of the way, we can get to the other bolt on here. This is the one that actually loosens up the valve. So you can see now, this bolt is the one that connects to this bracket. The other one we took off was underneath that to hold this on. You can see the bolt hold here. So if you take this one off first, you can get to this one a lot easier. Okay, now with those off, we're ready to start disconnecting the hose clamps. There's one over here we need to get to, and then a couple down at the bottom. The easiest way to get to the extra hose that's connected to the engine over here is from this side. And then you just want to grab this hose clamp. I can't really show you on camera. There's not enough room for both me and the clamp, but you can squeeze it and it'll lock in place, and then you can just slide it off. You'll want to grab a hose hook tool, something like this one, and see if you can work it around the perimeter of that edge of the hose and free it up. So I'm just hooking this underneath the hose and working it around the pipe to try to loosen it. Once it's loose, the hose should pull off. There it goes, so we're off. With this hose clamp off now, you can see it's locked right here. So this way the hose clamp will slide back and forth, and then we can just finish pulling this hose off. And now we're halfway here on this valve assembly. So underneath this battery tray, you can see the cooler here for the transmission. And we've got a couple of hose clamps. You can just take this little bracket, this plastic cable off, and then we can take this hose clamp off the top part of the cooler. And then we can pry this hose off as well. Okay. There's one. Now we also have to take the second one off. Let's move this out of the way. Okay, and with this hose off, we're gonna wanna take the one below that off as well. Let's get this cables out of the bracket. And this other hose clamp is difficult to see from this angle. but it's hiding way down here. We'll remove this bracket. This just holds the two hoses together. And we'll get the other hose clamp from here. Now, with that second hose clamp off, we should be able to pop this other hose off the cooler. There it goes. Okay, so we have made a little bit of a mess there. There's some coolant left in these hoses, a little residual. And what we want to do is see if we can pull this whole hose assembly out. There's another bracket here, just connecting a cable tie that we need to release. And I usually use this little hose hook for that. Release the tab on it. All right, with all that undone, we can remove this valve assembly completely. There you have it. With that valve assembly and hoses out of the way, we'll go ahead and take this one off. Get another 12 millimeter holding the bracket on. Take the bolt out of that. And then we've got one more hose we've got to take off right here. Okay. You can use your hose hook tool again right in here. Get underneath the hose and work it around. Sometimes a little WD-40 will help lubricate this enough so it pulls off easy. And then we're going to take this whole valve assembly out. Okay, there's the second one. Now that we've got both of these hoses off, I'm going to reuse these original Toyota clamps on here. If you get lucky, you'll get these clamps to stick through those. There's a little hook on there. You have to squeeze it and twist it to the side in order to get it to latch. I'm about 20% successful on these things half the time. So this one I was able to get, and we're just going to slide it over. If not, if you can't get it, then just use your hose pliers or needle nose, whatever you're using, and just swap the clamp over. It's easy enough. Try to put it in a similar location to where it was when you took it off to make the installation a little bit easier. We'll do the same thing on this other hose. So I'm just going to slide it off, slide it back on. Same thing here. Now, you guys are welcome to use new hose clamps if you want. I like reusing these clamps if they're in good shape and the car doesn't have a lot of miles. This car's probably got just under 60,000 miles, 55 I think it was. So I'm going to reuse these clamps. They're not that old. They've got good spring tension on them, and they'll continue to adjust themselves with that spring force over time as these hoses compress a little bit, whereas if you had a worm-style clamp, might need some tightening up, in the futures here sometimes. So I like using the spring clamps over again if they're in good shape. All right, I'm going to start installing this flow control valve that's attached near the cylinder head first, because this one connects to the bottom of the transmission cooler. So it'll be easier to put this on now, and then we'll work our way to the other one. We're connected there, and then we're going to get the other side on the back of this cylinder head. Just verify your hose clamps are in place before you stick your hoses on. Hopefully they didn't fall off. And just ensure your hose is pushed on all the way. We've got both ends connected here. I'm going to slide a hose clamp in place, and then we're going to go ahead and put this hose clamp on the lower portion of the cooler. Now, it's important to make sure your hose is pushed on all the way, and you want your hose clamp sitting just behind the bump or the barb that's on the cooler itself. All of these connections, pipes and things, even on your radiator, they have this little bump on the end called the barb. We want the hose clamp to sit just behind that, right in here. We don't want it to sit over the top of it. So just make sure when you put your hose on, push it all the way down to the base, and then put the clamp right in the middle behind the barb. All right, we've got that end on the cooler now. Let's go ahead and put the other hose assembly in. And we want this hose clamp to sit behind the bump in there, the one we talked about. I'll move that up over to there. Okay, just behind it. You can feel it there, where it drops back, just behind it. I'm gonna route this underneath everything. Connect over here to the other end of the cooler. And then we can bolt our bracket up to the side of the transmission. And this can be a little tricky to line up here. So I put the bolt through the bracket first, and then I try to feel around for that threaded hole until you get it caught. And then we'll run that one tight. And we'll plug in this electrical connector. You can hear it click. I want to put this hose clamp on the upper cooler line here. This is the second valve we installed. Put that down right behind the barb there. So both of our hoses are connected now to the cooler. We've got them in the right spot. And then we just want to double check and make sure that we're installing all of our brackets and things where they belong. We've got some hose stays and some connectors that we can hook back up. Now that we've got all that tidied up, all those hoses and hose clamps on the bottom end of this, I want to put this valve and bolt it back into the bracket. So remember, we got to put the new valve bracket has to get bolted on first. And then that old extension pipe over here is the one we're going to put on afterwards. So let's get this snugged up. And then we'll go back and get that one. Okay, that one's in place. And then we got this one here with this little green clip on it is the one that has to go below that. That was the one we had to take off to get the other one some access easily. Feel around here, make sure we get that started nice before we use any power tools on it. And then should be able to get right in here and install this. Okay, not too tight because this is a plastic housing on that pipe. We don't want to snap that. Okay, so now everything's in place there. You can take this connector and just take a peek in here and make sure your O-ring is still in there and everything feels good. You don't want to have any leaks later. And then you should be able to just push this on gently and then snap your clip in place. Okay, pull it on a little bit, make sure it doesn't want to come out. And then we can plug our connector back in. Now, if you guys are working on this car and one of the reasons you're doing it is because you've got coolant in the connector, you want to get that all cleaned out. So get yourself a little brake cleaner, maybe a pick, and make sure you dig everything out of there and get that connector nice and clean and dry before you put it back together. This one didn't have that problem, so I'm not going to worry about it here. Okay, the last hose clamp we need to put on is this one back here by the cylinder head. This is the same process. Just make sure you've got it over the barb, and then you can release your clamp. I think we've got everything connected now. The hose connections are on, and we've got all the cables tied back up in the little plastic clips that they go into. The electrical connectors are plugged in. Everything's connected, so we should be good to go. Just got a little coolant we spilled up the top here. A little trick I like to use here in the shop, all the guys do. If you have a little washer fluid, it does a good job of eating up some of the crusty pink residue that you get from these Toyota cooling systems. This way you don't leave anything behind. We don't want it to look like we have a leak later on in the future when it was just something residual left over from this one. So I usually take a little bit of this. If I see an area that looks like it's got some heavy concentration, I might just spray a little in a spray bottle on that area, work that area a little bit. This one doesn't have a whole lot of buildup and everything's coming off pretty easily. So I'll just do that and then dry it off so we don't have any mess later to deal with. Now that we've got everything reconnected and back in place, all the electrical connectors plugged in, all that good stuff, we're ready to put our battery tray back in our air box and all those items we took out in order to gain access to this. We got the 3 bolts for the battery tray with the 12mm head on them. This air box will just plug back into a few rubber grommets. Make sure you got the snorkel here stuck in the bottom of the air cleaner where it belongs. We're gonna be putting a new air filter in here, so we've got that ready to go. I'll need to reinstall this snorkel here. And we've got some brackets here on the cables we can put back on. And another one on this side. This is the cable stay for our negative battery cable. And we've got another one here. And then I think we're ready to put the battery in. Okay. And then this battery hold down wraps around here on the side of this battery. Make sure you slide it up underneath the side of the battery tray. This way everything lines up properly. We'll snug that hole down. And then we're ready to put some battery cables on again. We're going to go with the positive cable first. We'll tighten this up so we don't have any short circuits to anything metal ground by accident. Restore the cover here. We'll hook up the negative side. Make sure that terminal sits all the way down. Tighten that up. And we can put our air box back in. These cables back in their brackets where they go. Plug the mass airflow sensor back in, make sure you hear it click. All right, so a couple things I took care of in the background here. I had to go back and remove my air box and tighten up the bracket on the computer there. I forgot to put the hardware back in there. Sorry, I'm human. And then I went underneath and put our cover back up, the one I had to take down in order to drain the radiator. So if you're involved in those things, make sure you do that, get everything cleaned out underneath. And the last step for us here is just to fill the cooling system. Now, it's really important. This is a step that you don't want to skip because we want to make sure we bleed all the air out of the cooling system. There are a couple of methods of doing that. The first method that we want to use is what Toyota prescribes in there. What they basically want you to do is to remove this coolant hose off the EGR pipe, and then they want you to fill the cooling system up until air purges out, squeeze the upper hose a few times to try to bleed some of the air out of the system, and repeat that process a little. They want you to turn the key on, start the car up, and then get the electric water pump circulating, 3,000 RPMs, and then cycle that through a few times like that to make sure you've purged all the air out of the system. Now, that will work just fine. And another method I like to use, which I think is a little bit easier here, is just to use a cooling system evacuating tool like this one. This will actually suck all the air out of the cooling system, and then we're going to go ahead and replace all that air with coolant. We're going to let it suck the coolant right back into the cooling system, fill it up to the top. So this is a great method to fill a cooling system and remove the air from the system at the same time. So I'm going to show you how this works real quick, and we'll get this system bled out. So basically I've got an air hose connected here. This air is going to create a siphon on the gauge here. We're going to suck this system into a vacuum, and the hoses will actually collapse on here. You'll see those hoses suck all the way together because we're removing all the air out of the system and creating a vacuum inside there. Just a couple of things you want to make sure, though. You want to purge this air out of this hose before we refill, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So I've got a couple of buckets here of this Asian coolant. This is good for Toyota and the things that require this super long life pink coolant. And then I'm just going to go ahead and stick this in the radiator. It has this conical tip on it. We'll put it right in there so that we get a good seal and hold it steady. And this doesn't take very long. We're just going to go ahead and start sucking this cooling system. So I've got the valve shut off. I don't want to suck any coolant in. So this will start to pull a vacuum on the gauge. And once we get this all the way into the green zone, or almost close to 20 inches of vacuum as far as we can get, then we'll be ready to fill the system. What I like to look for is to see if the hoses have completely collapsed. So I can see the lower radiator hose from here. It's actually completely squished in. So once that hose is completely collapsed, I usually let it go maybe another 30 or 40 seconds. Really just want to pull as much air to this system as we possibly can. We don't want any pockets of air once we refill it. So it's always a good idea, once you've got the system completely evacuated, you've pulled a vacuum, check your gauge, note where it's at, and you want it to stay there. If it seems to bleed down at all, you've got a leak somewhere that you need to address before you fill the cooling system. So I usually let this sit for a minute or so just to make sure I don't have any vacuum bleeding off. While I'm doing this too, you can go ahead and purge the air. We've got this going all the way to the bottom of our coolant bucket. And we just want to purge some air out of here. So you can see the pink coolant come up in the hose, and I want to stop it right when it gets to my tool, right there. I don't want to put any coolant back in the system just yet. I'm gonna go ahead and run this for another few seconds. Make sure we've got all the air out of the system. And once we've got our hose bled out, we've got no air in the hose, our system's holding a vacuum, we're ready to refill. All we have to do is open this up and monitor the fluid in the jug. We don't want it to run empty, so we'll get it down close to the bottom. I'll turn my valve off, I'll switch the hose over to the next container if I need to, and we'll continue filling until we have no vacuum left in our system. Okay, I'm gonna flip this hose over to the next one. Then I'll open this back up. We'll let this fill the rest away. Now, as we get closer to 0 or no vacuum left, you'll start to see the radiator hoses come back to their normal round shape. And once we have no vacuum left in the system, we're not able to draw any more coolant in, the system should be full. All right, so right before I start this up, I just wanted to go ahead and top up the radiator here, make sure it's full to the top, make sure our reservoir is up to the full level. Then we'll start the car up, let it run for a minute or two. We'll go ahead and squeeze the hoses a few times with that electric water pump circulating just to make sure there's no air bubbles in there. Then we're ready to cap it up. Now we've run this a bit and purged the rest of the air, the cooling system. There really wasn't anything left in there after that bleed procedure that we went through with the cooling system evacuator. The last step in here was just to clear the codes on it. I went in there with the scan tool, erased the trouble codes out of the memory, and then we'll give this a good road test. That about wraps it up. I just wanted to mention in here about this Toyota Long Life coolant here. This is a Xerox brand. Pennzoil makes a brand. Everybody makes their own version of Toyota's super long life coolant, the pink stuff. So just make sure you're using the right coolant in these. I think they're silicate-free and borate-free, something like that. This is Toyota Scion Lexus coolant, good for all their newer products. So make sure you're using the right coolant out there. I hope you guys enjoy this content. If you had this problem on your car, hopefully this is something you can handle on your own, the job you can tackle by yourself. And thanks for watching. Make sure you check out some more content here. We got plenty of great videos for you. If you're enjoying our stuff, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.